Welcome back to Project 613. Today we learn all about the Jewish servant, and we have a number of mitzvot connected to this. The first is the mitzvah governing how and when a Jewish person could become a servant at all. There's a very limited amount of ways how this is possible. Either if a person stole and didn't have money to repay what they stole, so the Bet Din sells them as a servant, as a slave, in order to be able to repay the money that they owe. Another way that a Jewish person can become a servant is if they are destitute and they choose to sell themselves as a servant. In one of these two ways, the Torah tells us that either way, their term can only be for 6 years, and after the 6 years, they go free. If they want to stay on afterwards, then there is a process, and they call it the Evet Nirtza, where they have a hole pierced in their ear, and even then, they only stay until the Jubilee year. In general, the entire law of a Jewish servant only is applicable at a time when the Jubilee year was in effect, and that ceased to be from the time of the end of the Second Temple era. Then we have a number of specific mitzvot in how the Jewish servant needs to be treated. Number one, it is forbidden, the Torah tells us that it's forbidden to sell a Jewish servant in the regular way that it was common for people to sell slaves, where they were put up in public on the market in a public place. Rather, the Jewish servant has to be sold in a discreet, respectful manner. The next two mitzvot have to do with the specific type of work that could be given to a Jewish servant. One is called the prohibition of giving the servant something called avodat perech. The verse says, "You shall not make him work with rigor." And what that means is not necessarily a hard type of work, but any work which has no purpose is considered avodat perech. So for example, even telling your servant to do something just to keep him busy, if you don't have a reason why this act needs to be done, to the extent the example that Maimonides gives is if the master tells his servant to heat him up a cup of water, if he has no reason for that, that would be a violation of this prohibition, because he's only doing it in order to keep his servant busy, but he has no need for it. Other examples of this would be to give your servant an undefined job to do, or to give him a job to do without telling him when to stop. So to tell him, just do something until I tell you to stop, that's forbidden. Rather, you need to define the work. You have to tell him, you can tell him to do a job until that specific job is finished, or until a certain time on the clock. But giving him an undefined or unlimited job, just say, do this until I come back, that would be forbidden. That is considered avodat perech. Another type of work that's forbidden to give a Jewish servant is something called avodat eved, the type of work that was commonly given to a slave, but is forbidden to give to a Jewish servant. And that includes any type of humiliating labor that may have commonly been performed by other slaves. A Jewish slave is not allowed to be given this type of work, rather is only allowed to be given work that a regular employed worker would agree to. The example that Maimonides gives for this is even having your servant carry your clothes behind you to the bathhouse. That would be considered a humiliating type of labor, and it's forbidden to have your Jewish servant perform this type of labor. And finally, the last mitzvah that we learned today is that even if the Jewish servant is owned by a non-Jewish owner, and of course he should have never have sold himself to a non-Jewish owner, and in fact it's a prohibition to do so, but let's say someone for whatever reason did sell themselves to a non-Jewish owner, if we find out that that non-Jewish owner is mistreating his Jewish slave, we have to get involved and try and stop the non-Jewish owner from giving this type of work, this avodat perech, from making the Jewish servant work with avodat perech. There is even an obligation that we have to try and redeem the Jewish servant, so he should not have to work for a non-Jewish master. We will learn more about the Jewish servant tomorrow. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.